You've probably heard these sayings a time or two. First one I'm going to say is when someone shows you who they are multiple times, believe them because you start seeing that pattern of what is to come. And secondly, when the lights shine the brightest, you learn more about who a coach is, who a player is, and who a team is. And that is happened time and time again when the lights shine bright, who shows up the best. And this last weekend was, well, weekend, it felt like a weekend. This last holiday, we saw those two things to be true. We're going to talk about those college football playoff games and what is yet to come. I'm your host, Matthew Raridan, and this is Total Sports Talk Beyond the Lights. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Total Sports Talk Beyond the Lights, where I am your host, Matthew Raridan. And with me today, as always, we've got David Street.
Well, not as always, because it's been a while, hasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, you got David Street and we got Ed Smith.
Welcome, y'all.
Ed, guys, this was a very intriguing New Year's Day as we witnessed three of the four college football playoff games as the unfortunate tragedy that struck in New Orleans postponed the Sugar Bowl one day, and we did see that happen the next day. But there were some shocking developments that happened in these games. Some that we predicted, some that we didn't really see happening. Uh, we've got a lot of questions. I know that we're not the only ones out there that have these questions. I'm sure you guys have these questions too. But I want to get into these games, these recaps, and kind of ask a question or two. So let's start with first the Penn State Nittany Lions against the Boise State Broncos. Sorry, but Cinderella is just a Disney movie because there was no Cinderella story in the college football playoffs and even in this game. Boise State, I was pulling for you. I wanted to see you win, but ultimately Penn State was just too much for the Broncos to handle as they won 31-14. And this was all Penn State's game. They did an amazing job shutting down Ashton Genty. And I know we all wanted to see Ashton Genty get that record. Barry Sanders was even pulling for him. We love seeing history. But Penn State, guys, was just the better team, David. I think we kind of knew going into this game that they would be the better team. But was there anything that kind of surprised you in this game?
I mean, not particularly, because so in my bracket, I actually had SMU upsetting Penn State, and then therefore I had Boise State beating SMU. But Penn State beating SMU in the first round kind of changed everything. And I'll be honest with you, I know Penn State won big, but I was not that impressed with them. I mean, other than making Ashton Genty look like a human for the first time ever, I didn't think that Penn State really uh, played like a dominant team. I mean, yes, they dominated, but also kind of what happens when you're the vastly superior team. So kudos to them for the win, but that wasn't a win where I was like, wow, Penn State really came to play.
Yeah, I mean, Ed, it's always tough because Penn State did deal with some injuries. Abdul Carter left the game after, I want to say, the first quarter, and he's top prospect in the NFL draft. But I will say I was impressed with them still holding it together without their best defensive player. Great teams need to be able to hold it together when they lose someone. So were you still impressed with that defense? Because we predicted Ashton Genty would eventually have his way, but I don't really think he did.
He really didn't because every you know what Boise State is all about on offense. We talked about on this show such a narrow path that Boise State had to win this game against Penn State, who has a really good defense for the Big Ten, not for the Mountain West Conference, which that's what Ashton Genty's been running all over all season. They have Penn State has a really good defense for one of the top tier programs and one of the top tier conferences in college football. So we we expected there to be at least one of those magical runs from Ashton Genty. They did not. The Nittany Lions did not allow that to happen, and it was impressive on their behalf to not let that happen at any point during that game. And we say that Ashton Genty looked human, that uh, he didn't explode. You know, he wasn't as explosive. He didn't get loose, but he still ran for over 100 yards. That's still very hard to do, especially when you're talking about this uptick in competition that Boise State really had not seen since they played Oregon.
Yeah, I mean, Penn State had not given up a 100-yard rusher all year, and that streak broke, against Boise State. But uh, I was how do I put this? The stat sheet, you're going to look at it and you're going to see the more total yards. But I think what Boise State isn't used to is losing the ground game because let's be honest, Penn State's got a two-headed monster back there, and only them and Ohio State this year have two running backs with seven or more 100-yard rushing games. So that's you have that with Singleton and Allen for Penn State, and it's almost unstoppable. Those are two great running backs. But what I was impressed with the most, and I know this was against Boise State, but I didn't think Drew Aller had it in him fully as a quarterback, but some of the throws I saw him make on Saturday, I was really impressed with. So I do want to give the kudos out to him. And Tyler Warren is a freak. That guy could be a game changer in this next game because of all that he can do. So that's a name to really look out of. But the biggest thing to me was Ashton Genty had two fumbles all year. He had two fumbles in the first half. If you wanted to know how this game was going to go, that right there pretty much showed it. But David, you still doubled down that Penn State didn't look that impressive to you, but you have to admit their defense though looks pretty good.
Oh yeah, and I complimented them earlier when I said that they did a good job of making Genty look human. What I said was, other than making Genty look human, the team overall, didn't impress me that much. But the defense has been rock solid all year long. That's been a top five defense all season long.
Ed, I know we've mentioned his name many times before and we've talked about him, but is this a game to kind of give kudos to Coach James Franklin, or is it, well, they played Boise State?
They played Boise State.
All right. I figure that would be your answer. So
Yeah. So I want to give Boise State their flowers. They kept it close, but in the second half, they were still moving the ball against the defense. Maddox Manson did a pretty decent job, but when you get into the opposing team's uh, side of the field 4 times in a row and come out with no points, that's a problem. And that inevitably was the deciding factor because 3 interceptions and a missed field goal, you're not going to win when when those things especially compound each other uh, and this high a level of play. I don't want to say that Boise State can't play at this high level. I'm just pointing out that they have played a schedule that is not of the Power Four variety, even though the Big Ten does have some teams that I think would be somewhat comparable to what Boise State had to play during the season.
This was this was basically a James Franklin special because what have I said about James Franklin multiple times on the show? I have said that when he's dealing with a team that's vastly inferior in talent, he wins. And that's pretty much what happened here. Penn State is vastly superior in talent, and he was able to get the dub.
And I know we'll talk about it here later on, but he may have that almost clear path to going to the championship because of those inferior opponents or lack thereof in his way. So we'll talk about that here later on. Any final points on this game before I jump to the next one? Alrighty. Well, Ed.
No, I was going to just point out that I I don't think that this was a bad result for Boise State overall,
No.
because has this is going to be much like another game we're going to talk about soon. This is going to be the recruitment game. This is going to be a game that they can point at the wall and go, see, you can play for a national championship and be in the playoff with this program, and that's going to up their ability to recruit to Boise State even more so than what they've had been able to do so far.
Yeah, I mean, Boise State is not going to be bad anytime soon, man. I think within the last 10, 15 years, I think the worst season they ever had was 8-5 or something like that. So they're going to be fine.
Yeah, it was an audition, and I mean I think they did well. I know they didn't win, but they didn't give up either. So you have just to have that fight in you. It really does show a lot of things, especially to recruits. So Boise State, I think, will be just fine, and by joining a new conference and leveling up, should help them more in the future. But on to the next game, and that was the Texas Longhorns and the Arizona State Sun Devils. We previewed this game and we talked about how Texas being the better team, but what are they known for? Jumping out to a lead, letting another team catch up, and then run away with it. Well, two of those things were right as far as they jumped out to a nice, decent lead. I mean, it was in a blink of an eye, Texas got two touchdowns. It was really early, and it was one of those games early on that it was like, wow, okay, this is gonna be like that. Okay, well, there was a guy named Cam Scadaboo who had other plans and almost single-handedly brought this Arizona State Sun Devil team back into the game, tying it at 24 apiece with his throwing touchdown and with his rushing touchdown. This guy could do it all. He led them on the ground. He led them at receiving. Uh, we've talked about him. David, I know, has. Scadaboo's a beast,
I'm convinced that the biggest reason he won MVP was because of that throwing touchdown.
which he audibled, by the way.
Yeah, voters were like, okay, he played as a quarterback. We got to give him the award now.
I mean, he did impressive. He really
No, he
did.
was impressied. No, I don't want to take that away from him.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, it's the first time I can't remember how many years, but it's been a long time since losing team player won MVP for a game. So, but Ed, I'm really going to let you take the floor here so you can kind of get your thoughts out on this game. Your Longhorns did come away with the victory. What things were you impressed with? What things were you not impressed with in this game?
I was impressed with the preparation for for Quinn Ewers to be ready for that 4th and 13 that he faced in the overtime. That was all or nothing. And going back and listening to Coach Sark, they actually practiced that play against that defense uh, before the game took place. That is a well prepared, well coached team. The issue that I continue to have is that Texas will play 2.5 quarters and just disappear for a quarter and a half. And that's exactly what happened here. Now, granted, when Texas got the punt return for a touchdown, you're going to take those points. But in doing so, the offense never really gained a rhythm. they only ran 63 plays the entire game, and more than half of those were in the fourth quarter. So that was an issue for the Texas offense. And on the flip side, that left the defense on the field for so long that eventually Cam Scatterbo is going to wear you down. Arizona State had 24 third downs. That means that they are constantly just beating you up front, 2 yards in a cloud of dust the entire way down the field. And with the way Texas comes out of halftime, for some ungodly reason, the third quarter is absolutely horrific for Texas this entire season. So that allowed Arizona State to get back in this game and to make it close. Just like I said when we were breaking this game down before. And eventually the Longhorns were able to out athlete the Sun Devils at the end, at the very end. Uh, but overall, for Arizona State, it wasn't about athletes. It was about execution. It was about grit. It was about heart. And they showed everybody that that is going to be a program that is going to be making some waves in that new look Big 12 for years to come, even after Cam Scatterbo leaves. Because Sam Levitt, he's a redshirt freshman. So he's going to have the reins of that offense for the next 3 years. With Texas, we move on to the next round of these playoffs, and it's going to be a round in which we can absolutely cannot have a partial game in any way, shape, or form. That it has to be a complete game to keep it somewhat close, and that'll be talked about for the next week and a half.
Well, I think, and Ed, I think you might agree with me here as well, that I think Texas was very fortunate to win this game because
Oh, yeah.
Arizona, yeah, Arizona State completely dominated this game. They nearly doubled the Longhorns in yards, and you talk about athleticism, and that's pretty much what we saw when Quinn Ewers threw that deep bomb to I don't remember the receiver he threw it to, but that was just a clear display of superior athleticism right there.
Yeah, that throw, that first touchdown to Bolden, that was just pure out outrunning, and everything just worked perfectly.
Yeah.
The biggest issue that Texas ran into time and time again during the game was they could not get any continuity as far as a running game. They're they're used to having 4 yards on first down. They were getting one, maybe two. Uh, Average yards per rush for Texas in that game, 1.8 yards. That is not a Steve Sarkisian offense that wins ball games. They were able to gut it out when everything got condensed down to just that small area and not having to go the length of the field.
Yeah, and I know that we mentioned him, but I was really impressed with Sam Levitt. I know you're going to look at the stats, and it may not look the best, but Sam Levitt kept so many plays alive with his legs. I was impressed. He even had some really long third down runs that got them a first down or got them within reach to get a fourth down conversion. Uh, Arizona State really had a lot of control in this game when you look at the stats. But Sam Levitt, without his number one receiver, I was really impressed with the kid. And to do this against Texas, who has one of the best defenses in all of college football, they had a really great game, and they were so close to winning it. If you look at the win probability in first overtime when they got their touchdown to start it off, their win probability went up to almost 100% because a lot of people thought that game was going to be over, and then it was 4th and 13 for Texas in overtime. I mean, even myself, I'm like, this may be it for Texas. And Texas did prove us wrong. Great teams show up when it matters, and they did. They did get that touchdown, and then the very next overtime, first play, touchdown. And so, yes, they might have escaped with a victory, but nonetheless, a victory it was. But I think that they need to go back to that running game, Ed. I was a little confused because they had such success in their first playoff game with the running game, and then it was nowhere to be found.
Yeah, Trey Weisner is an outside zone slash type running back. He's not a between the tackles guy. And that's where the offense wants to run the ball, especially behind this offensive line, which is one of the top 3 offensive lines in the country. Now, on the flip side of that, the number 1 rated quarterback in the quarterfinal round was Quinn Ewers, and that's a feather in his cap going into the next game. But we can't rely on Quinn Ewers to be everything. We need him to be a distributor. We need him to be able to hand the ball off and take some of the pressure off of the passing game, which everything was condensed down into just the passing game with the way that Arizona State was able to crowd the outside zones and uh, keep the running attack from gaining any momentum.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to talk about Scadaboo like winning MVP real quick. And so, anybody who's watched this, and you guys know that I have this, I have a belief that the MVP should go to someone on the winning team, and I have to be consistent with that. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say Scadaboo didn't deserve it. I mean, certainly he was. I mean, because of him, Arizona State almost won the game. Like, they came back from down big and they almost won the game. And I would probably understand more if Texas didn't really have anybody that stood out individually. But Quinn Ewers, and I can't remember what his stat line was, but I think it was something along the lines of 322 yards passing, 3 passing touchdowns, 1 interception, and then, like we mentioned before, he had that bomb of a touchdown, literally screaming MVP right there. So I'm just a little confused how he doesn't win. Again, kudos to Scadaboo, but Quinn Ewers had the stat line and the moment to win MVP, in my opinion. What do you think, Ed?
I don't disagree with you, but Scadaboo is the people's champion. He's the Rocky of this sport at this point. So I get it. I do I do agree with you that Quinn Ewers had the moment and had the stat line that would warrant a MVP or MOP or MOP uh, reward for this game. However, Scadaboo, because he was the leading pass catcher, he was the leading running back, he threw a touchdown pass, he was everything. So I get it. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I understand why they would think Scadaboo was the most important player in this game overall versus Quinn Ewers putting up a decent stat line.
Yeah.
Yep. No, I agree there. Any final points before we hunker down to the next game?
Just that the the defense in the secondary, they are going to have to put it all together uh, for the next round of the playoffs. And I know this is going to be controversial. That was not targeting. Not targeting.
Just because the official on TV says it was doesn't mean it wasn't.
No. It is impossible to not have helmet to helmet contact when you're wrapping up a receiver. And yes, you're taught to drive into the receiver. He didn't, forcibly get down into the halo
Yeah, the
to
crown.
get contact.
Yeah.
So that was not targeting.
Well, my final thoughts for this one are where does Arizona State go from here. Like because you kind of get the sense that this is basically an all or nothing kind of year for them, and certainly they're not going to. I'm not trying to say that Arizona State had championship expectations. Certainly not, before the season started. But Arizona State is not going to be able to build a roster the same way that Texas has, right? They're not going to be able to do it through recruiting. They're going to have to do it more so through the transfer portal. And as we saw with Florida State, the transfer portal can be hit or miss. So I think Kenny Dillingham did a hell of a job this year, and I think he is certainly the right guy. But again, and for lack of better terminology, this did kind of feel like an all or nothing year for ASU. So you got to wonder where they go from here.
Absolutely, and I know Dillingham got that contract extension, so you kind of see where they're at. They truly believe he's their guy. If they do, hopefully recruits do or transfers do. So, but right now they're kind of on that high, and it's going to be tough to kind of meet those expectations, for a couple more years as he gathers recruits. This next game we could probably just skip, but but I will talk about it as hard as it is. That was Ohio State Buckeyes and the Oregon Ducks, the number one Oregon Ducks. I want to put an emphasis on that. This was a rematch of the regular season, and where the Ducks won by 1 point in Autzen against Ohio State. It was one of the best regular season games that we saw all year. There was a lot of expectation that we would see a very similar game in this game. That was not the case. That was not the case at all. Although me and Ed predicted that Ohio State would win, we were correct there. We did think that it would be a little bit closer than this. But no, I took my remote, hit the rewind button, and here I was back in 2014 watching the same exact game where Ohio State beat my Oregon Ducks in the national championship game to a very similar score that this is.
Almost exactly identical.
It was the same total. It was 42-20 in the national championship game and 41-21 here. So if you add the two scores, it was the same total. But this was very embarrassing, especially for a number one team. You could blame many factors. I'm not here to blame or make excuses whatsoever. I truly felt going into this game, I thought Ohio State was going to be the better team. That's why I chose them to win. Little did I know they would be the superior team all four quarters, like they were. I kind of still lost at words, even though this is a couple days after the fact, because I do trust Dan Lanning. I do think that he will be a great coach someday. I know that he still has to get there, but I felt as if we were not prepared whatsoever for this. If you look at it, Ohio State pretty much had the same game plan they had against Tennessee. They showed you what they were capable of and what they were going to do. Shoot, even Jeremiah Smith told you a couple days before, you put man coverage on me, we're going to throw my way. I guess we didn't get that memo because he was having a field day on us, to the point to where even Kirk Herbstreit mentioned this is shades of Jackson Smith and Jigba game in the Rose Bowl a couple years ago, where he went off for 300 yards or almost that. And I think Jeremiah Smith could have gotten that much because that's how dominant he was. He had 129 receiving yards in the first quarter alone. So this was just a big embarrassment for the Ducks, and it was tough to see. It was very tough to see. But Ohio State, guys, is looking like the best team in the college football playoffs, and they are looking like a team that is going to be very tough to stop. And I want to just say this one point, and I'll let you guys take this because this is my time to eat crow, to give props to one player, and that is Will Howard. At the beginning of the year, when Will Howard transferred to Ohio State, I had nothing good to say about it. I thought this is not a guy who's going to lead Ohio State to the playoffs. This is not a guy who's going to lead them to a national championship game. Will Howard has looked like an elite quarterback these last two games against Tennessee and Oregon. And He has led his team to the semifinals. So I do want to give my props to Will Howard because I was wrong there. I just didn't think this team was going to be any good with him at the quarterback position. I was wrong because here they are in the semifinals and the Ducks are not there. Ed, I'm going to go to you first. What were your thoughts watching this game, and what did this is this what you expected?
It's not what I expected. However, we had talked previously about Ohio State and how they react after playing Michigan and losing to Michigan.
Yeah.
They just turn it on after that. I don't know why losing to Michigan causes this to happen to them, but Chip Kelly
Yeah.
uh,
The irony.
and Ryan Day, they put together a game plan after the Michigan game. They're finally, finally, they play to all their strengths and not against their weaknesses. That was one of the big problems with the game against Michigan was they left such a narrow path for Michigan to beat them, and they got beat. Well, they turned right back around and said, "You know what? Forget all this. We are so much better than who we're playing at all levels. We don't care who's on the other side." And they really showed it. Now, Chip Kelly's game planning and Jeremiah Smith's development over this year, you saw him get singled up on safeties instead of just on quarterbacks. That first game, he was on an island by himself uh, and didn't get very far because Dan Lanning was able to game plan against him just running down the field on 9 routes or these simple short and go, not a whole lot of variety there. Well, with this game, you saw Jeremiah Smith get moved around. He got uh, put in places where the Ducks could not bracket him as easily. It looked very similar to uh, Justin Jefferson in the Kevin O'Connell offense. It was it was set up in such a way where it left Jeremiah Smith wide open in ways that there should be no reason why that guy is left wide open. He is a player in which if he were to come out into the draft after his freshman year of college, he would still be in the first round. He's just that good, and with the the rest of the offense around him, they did their blitzkrieg of Oregon in that first half. It and by halftime, half of America had thrown away the remote. The second half, it was time to just pound the rock and kill the clock and just move on. It was a very simple game plan for them. It was just done to such perfection that unfortunately Oregon never stood a chance.
David.
So Oregon may have been the number one team, and I picked Oregon to win it all. And well, now my bracket's busted. And Oregon is a top 10, borderline top 5 talented team. The problem, though, is that Ohio State is more talented. And as Ed pretty much implied, most of their offense was extremely underwhelming all season long. But, just something about that Michigan game flipped the switch, and also they basically said, "Oh shit, we have a $20 million roster. We should probably start playing like we have a $20 million roster."
Well, you know what's crazy about that is that 4 out of the top five NIL roster teams were in the quarterfinals, and believe it or not, was actually the number one team. So they had the most NIL roster team in college football, followed by Texas at 2, Ohio State at 3, LSU at 4, and Georgia at 5. So I mean, we see kind of the results of that, but uh, yeah, it just Ohio State is a more talented team. They really are, and Jeremiah Smith is going to be a problem to come on many Sundays. I'm just predicting that now. Ohio State has a way of producing these top tier receivers, and it just doesn't seem to end anytime. It doesn't, because we talked about Marvin Harrison last year, just around the same time.
And I tell you what, if Ohio State does win the national championship, and by the way, I'm predicting they are, I don't think any other team has a chance against them. But if they do, it's going to be the biggest national championship of all time. And what I mean is, hey, Ohio State, you won the national championship, but you still lost to Michigan.
Yeah, I know.
Like that Michigan loss is still going to be in the back of their heads. Like I remember when we won our very first title in 1996. You guys remember who our one loss was to?
Florida State.
Yep, it was Florida State. And then we get the perfect matchup when we play them in a rematch in the national championship. So the perfect way to redeem ourselves. Like if we had won the national championship against anyone other than Florida State, it would have been like, well, Florida, you're champions, but you still lost to Florida State. Although I think Florida State was actually a really good team that year, so it wouldn't have been that big of a deal, but still.
Yeah, and Jeremiah Smith, I don't know when he'll go into the draft. I mean, he's a true freshman, but we haven't had a wide receiver drafted number 1 since Keyshawn Johnson. The chances are very unlikely it'll happen, but there's someone that could. I mean, depending if it's a weak quarterback class, Jeremiah Smith could be one of those guys. So he's that talented, but so is all of Ohio State. Caleb Downs is looking really good on defense. They're from head to toe, they are talented. And Oregon is too, but they just didn't show up in this game. They didn't game plan. And like I said, the irony of Chip Kelly just killing us. That one was even a tougher pill to swallow. On to our last recap game. Some may say it was a snooze fest. And that was the Notre Dame Fighting Irish against the Georgia Bulldogs. And as we all,
baby.
and as we know,
no dynasty for you, UGA.
No, they were going to be without their starting quarterback Carson Beck as Gunnar Stockton took over for the Bulldogs, and Notre Dame won this game 23-10, guys, and they got over the Bulldogs. We didn't think that they would. I mean, I don't know about David. Me and Ed.
You know who had Notre Dame putting Georgia in the bracket? This guy did.
Yeah. That was just out of pure hate.
Hey, maybe part of it was out of hatred, but I was very confident, especially with all the injuries that Georgia had.
Yeah, it is tough, and injuries are tough to get over. I put some trust in Kirby Smart. He's still a great coach, but Notre Dame won this game with a quarterback who didn't throw over 100 yards.
Not only that,
it was like the most Notre Dame. What, David?
Well, he had 3.8 or 3.9 yards per pass attempt, so he was not Notre Dame won in spite of Riley Leonard.
Yeah, I mean, this was like the most Notre Dame game ever, but like I said, it was a win.
I don't think Ed agrees with you, Matthew. You saw his distinct face.
Uh-oh.
And
what are your thoughts, Ed?
Riley Leonard, very much like Sam Levitt, you never go broke taking a profit, and that's what he did the entire game.
Wait, Ed, dude, he had 90 passing yards. Are you seriously going to tell me that he had a good game?
80 rushing yards.
80 rushing yards. And it was the timing of these things. It wasn't how much it was the timing of them. Of a lot of things that Notre Dame did that made the biggest impact.
You know what? I'll take the L on that. I totally neglected his rushing yards. I totally forgot about that. So I'll take that one.
And Georgia had some very costly. They had a costly penalty that we all saw. All the national media saw the sideline penalty that took place, and Kirby Smart ripped that guy a new one. But in spite of that, Notre Dame actually had the most penalties with 75 yards, yet they still won the game, and they won it on the ground, 150 rushing yards. David, I'll have to ask you because this is your old player. Were you surprised that ETN only ended up with 38 yards?
Uh, was I surprised that he only ended up with 38 yards? I mean, I guess yes, just in the fact that ETN is still a very talented back, and certainly you would expect, you know, more than 38 yards from him. But hey, you know what? I'm not feeling sorry for him. I love it.
Yeah, I figured you. I figured you would, especially being a Florida fan. Uh, it's weird to see Georgia get knocked out, but they just weren't the better team in this game. They really weren't. That's not because they lost. Notre Dame has really perfected a game plan, even if the stats don't show it. They're winning games on several different levels. I mean, we saw the special teams in this game help them with a touchdown. Their defense is stepping up all around, and their offense is doing enough efficiency to pretty much just get it done. But it was still kind of shocking to see them actually beat Georgia because Georgia has shown time and time again that in the playoffs they do stand pretty tough. So, you have to give props to Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman here for picking up this win and picking up every win since the NIU debacle. So, you just kind of have to give Notre Dame their flowers when it comes to this. David, is there anything else you want to add here?
Well, my thoughts on the Georgia team, and this is a bit of a spoiler to a topic we're going to talk about in a few minutes. So I don't want to reveal too much. Um, but but this was for Georgia standards. This was a very underwhelming Georgia team because we're so used to teams just dominate their opponents, especially on defense. This was easily the worst defense in the Kirby Smart era, or at least since his first year in Athens, Georgia. And they only had, I think, two games all year where they won by at least 20 points. So, and I feel like we're just so used to seeing them. We're just so used to seeing them beat down opponents by 25, 30, 40 points, and that just did not, really happen a lot this year. And so I think per their standards, this was a disappointing year. Not just because they didn't win the national championship, but just per the eye test. I think Georgia had a lot. I think they left a lot to be desired, in my opinion.
Yeah. Ed, any final thoughts before I go forward?
Um, well, there's a couple of thoughts I had.
Yeah.
One, this game really came down to those 52 seconds because this was a game that was basically dead heated throughout the entire game until those 52 seconds where the Irish were able to get 17 points. That's basically your margin of victory here. I mean, yes, it's a 13-point game differential, but that basically, you had talked about the win probability. It went from being a dead heat to being 90% on Notre Dame's side, just like that. When Notre Dame came out in the second half and returned that ball for a touchdown, I mean, that was really the game plan for Notre Dame is to just kind of plod along as long as you can get the lead. Well, plodding along, I help them kind of just I keep that clock moving and get to the end. Just make it that way. With Gunnar Stockton, he didn't play a bad game by any stretch of the imagination, even though it was his first start. It was just a difficult scenario to to come out of the game one time, and then by the time he got into the game, I, you know, after one play and going into the second half, he went from being tied or uh, or down by 3 points to being down by 17 points. It was just a difficult thing for him to adjust to. I really want to give uh, uh, Marcus Freeman his flowers on the uh, special teams swaparoo penalty that they caused Georgia to jump off sides so they could bleed the clock another 3-4 minutes after that in the fourth quarter. Because on that 4th and 2 play, they're lining up for the kick, and all of a sudden you see an entire offense run out to the field and they swap places. That's coaching. That is preparation. That is being ready for what they wanted to do at that time. And no other coach in these playoffs has had the cojones to try and pull that kind of stunt. So I definitely want to give Marcus Freeman his flowers. That is the play that I think sealed it for the Fighting Irish. Yes, the Irish were able to get ahead, but they kept Georgia from getting the ball with enough time to make a difference in this game, and that was the reason. And I applaud uh, the preparation of the Irish for that.
Yeah, it's certainly not easy. It's certainly not easy to outcoach Kirby Smart. Very, very, very few head coaches in the last few years have been able to do that.
Yeah, yeah, very few indeed. So it was it was kind of weird seeing that happen because we're not used to seeing that happen. So, um, but where do we stand now? And now that those games are done and over with, we're on to the semifinals. And in the semifinals, we have the Texas Longhorns versus the Ohio State Buckeyes. And then we got the Penn State Nittany Lions versus the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Uh, some may not have had these teams there. Some may have had these teams here. But nonetheless, these are the four teams that stand tall right now. And it's going to be one heck of a semifinals. Some may argue that the Texas Ohio State game is going to feel like a national championship game because those are two big programs right there, very big programs. And no offense to Penn State, Notre Dame, because those are big programs too. But I think Texas and Ohio State will have a lot more viewers than the Penn State Notre Dame game. But let's talk about this format and how it's worked so far, because if you haven't caught on or if you haven't seen already, the teams that had the four teams who had the buys all lost their first game. So now you have people wondering, well, how's this format going to work in the future? What's the strategy here? Because Ohio State didn't even make their conference championship game, yet they're the favorites to win this. Okay. Notre Dame doesn't even have a conference, and they probably won't ever join a conference. And here they are. So, what's the strategy, and are they going to make some tweaks? But what do you guys think of this format? This is the first year, so this is all new to all of us. But David, what are you seeing so far in this format and how it's working out?
Well, certainly, obviously, the format has been disappointing so far, but I'm also a big believer in wait and see because this is only the first year of the new format, and we can't assume that it's going to be like this every single year. Now, let's say it's like this again next year, and let's say it does get to a point where, where things do have to change and ways of thinking do have to change, right? Well, and I actually had some trouble, thinking about this until I finally thought of something. But I think one thing that should be done when determining seating is that I think you have to find a way to factor in both strength of schedule and eye tests. Now, earlier I had mentioned Georgia, right? Georgia faced, I think, the toughest schedule in the country, certainly top three at least. So they got the wins, but as I pretty much said or implied before, Georgia did not have the eye test, okay? This was a very underwhelming Georgia team. This was one of the worst defenses in the Kirby Smart era. They did not dominate opponents the way that we're used to seeing Georgia teams dominate opponents. So Georgia may have had the strength of schedule, but they didn't have the eye test, in my opinion. So I think if you can find a way to factor in eye test with strength of schedule, I think that's something to consider looking forward into the future. What do you think, Ed?
I I think the combination of BCS, the old school BCS formula, a mathematical unit with a combination of people that can do a poll and have those weighted at different strengths. I think we can seed those 1 through 12 and not base it just solely on did you win this arbitrary conference championship game. I'm a proponent of getting rid of the conference championship game, but I don't think that is going to be feasible in a 12 team playoff. It may be more feasible in the 16, because if you get rid of the conference championship game, then you can have home home field first round playoff games for every conference winner, and you can. We did conference champions with tiebreakers long before these conference championship games took place. So we can use the regular season in that way to determine who are your conference champions and then start filling out the seeding after that using a BCS formula if you want to have those conference champions carry the flag of the top four seeds.
That's fair. That's
Yeah,
fair.
I like the I like the idea, and I do think that there definitely needs to be some tweaking to it, and there will, because you have to kind of iron some things out. You don't know how it's going to be until it's actually played out, but we're seeing that right before our eyes, which begs me to go to the next question here: is do we feel like these are the best semifinal matchups? And you erase what we've seen so far as the teams that have won, but I was talking to David before the show, and the Penn State Notre Dame game is actually going to be one of the most intriguing matchups that I think we're going to see. We know Texas and Ohio State could potentially be a slugfest, but Penn State and Notre Dame, this is defense and defense. These are teams that, you know, are who's going to just get enough done on offense to possibly win the game. It's going to be such a tight game, I feel like, in my opinion, between Notre Dame and Penn State. But is this are these the four best teams? Are these the best semifinal matchups? Ed, I'm going to ask you that question. Do you feel like the four teams remaining make up for the best semifinal matchups?
Well, to me, this is two separate questions.
Yeah.
The four best teams or the two best matchups. I think it's two of the best matchups that we could have hoped for out of what we saw in what we've seen in this bracket.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think it's the four best teams in this bracket. I still think Oregon is better than Notre Dame, better than Penn State. In fact, winning the conference championship game against Penn State, I mean, Oregon beat Penn State and Ohio State in the regular season. Why would I not claim that Oregon should be one of the top four teams, one of the last four teams in this playoff? So, but the way that the bracket works, and this is why it needs to be tweaked, in my opinion. Maybe some other ways, some other levers that way. But if the two questions, one, yes, these are the matchups that we want to see, because I am with you. I think Penn State and Notre Dame is going to be a very intriguing game to watch for those old school uh, head knocker uh, football fans out there. I think that game. I think this game is probably going to only take about 2.5 hours to play because the clock is never going to stop running.
Yeah.
Well, with Texas and Ohio State, that's going to be the circus. It is truly the circus. And what better place to have the circus than in Jerry World? That's
Yeah.
exactly what's going to happen.
With Bevo in attendance.
Hey, Brutus better look out. Bevo's coming after him.
Yeah.
I think.
He ain't afraid of no mascot.
No. David?
Well, I think if you're a casual, but you at least have enough knowledge to know just how big of brands Ohio State and Texas are, you might think that that's going to be the best matchup. But I think, and I don't think it's going to be close. I think Notre Dame and Penn State is going to be the best matchup just in terms of how competitive that game is going to be. Because, and I'm sorry, Ed, but I think Ohio State is going to kill Texas. Because I think Ohio State is just a team on a mission right now. I could be wrong in that I could be wrong about like Ohio State could still win, but it could be a close game. So I could be wrong about Texas killing you guys, or not Texas, Ohio State killing you guys. But just the way that Ohio State hasn't been playing lately, and just the way that Michigan loss had fueled them, and it's kind of ironic because before I thought that Michigan loss, and I said it here, I thought that Michigan loss was going to just be too much for Ohio State to overcome. That it was just that basically they were going to be in their feelings about it, and clearly I was wrong. I was wrong there.
I
So
wish you were right.
yeah,
Because when I saw that Oregon was going to have to face the winner between Tennessee and Ohio State with the rankings, uh, I was worried. I was. I remember saying it to you, David, and you're like, "Well, should you really be worried between Ohio State and Tennessee?" And I think we got our answer there because
yeah,
Ohio State now it looks like the most unstoppable team in the field. But anything could happen because I did not expect Oregon to look like that fully against
yeah,
Ohio State. So, like I said, anything could happen. Texas, Ohio State, Penn State, and Notre Dame. But I talked about it earlier in the show that we may have some questions and everyone may have some questions. So we made a list here of our top questions that we want to see answered from these semifinal games. And Ed, I'm actually going to start with yours because I think this was a very big question that you have here that you want answered. So you want to go ahead and ask that?
Sure. So my question for this semifinal round is, which of these head coaches, we're talking Steve Sarkisian, we're talking Ryan Day, we're talking James Franklin, we're talking Marcus Freeman, which of these head coaches needs the semifinal win to shed this can't win the big game stigma that is on their coaching resume? David, what would
yeah.
you say to that?
It's not even close. It's obviously Ryan Day. Obviously,
Yeah, the thing with Ryan Day is, yeah, it's tough for him to win that big game, but then now it seems like it's more shadowed of the Michigan because he's lost four straight to Michigan. Whereas James Franklin, he seems to lose every single game. Doesn't matter if it's against his rival or not. If it's against that inferior ranked team, big game. But I mean, I'll still go with you, David, that it's Ryan Day. But I just feel like the Michigan game has shadowed a lot of that.
yeah. I mean, and I'll elaborate further. I mean, James Franklin is probably would be number two on my list. But that Michigan loss was just so it was so unforgivable that we all said and we all agreed that the only way that Ryan Day, like the only way Ohio State fans would forgive Ryan Day for that, kind of, is if he wins the national championship. So if he wins the national championship, Michigan fans or Ohio State fans, they're still not going to forget that Michigan loss, but they'll definitely forgive Ryan Day a little more. So that's why Ryan Day is number one for me.
Yeah.
When
Uh,
when I first started asking this question, I was thinking more along the lines of the Penn State Notre Dame game as a head-to-head matchup, but expanding to the entire semifinals.
yeah.
And what I came away with in thinking of it that way is James James Franklin is the coach that needs to find some way to get this stigma off of him, because the first two rounds of the playoffs certainly aren't going to do it when you have a team that snuck in and you have a G5 team that you played to get to the semifinals. Whereas Notre Dame, I don't think it's Marcus Freeman that needs this game to clear this big game stigma, but it's the program of Notre Dame that needs to clear this stigma of big games. Brian Kelly, for as decent as he did at Notre Dame, he was 0-4 against top 10 teams, and losing by at least 16 points in each of those games. They This is a program that has not had a national championship since 1988. If you were born that year, you're probably using a CPAP machine and taking ibuprofen for joint pain. That's that is how long it's been since Notre Dame has been relevant in a big time atmosphere and with the elite of college football. So the program that needs it the most is Notre Dame. I'm still going to say James Franklin needs it the most because with as dominating as Ohio State has played the first two rounds, I think that's gotten him a little bit of leeway going into this round and then into a national championship if he gets that far. But James Franklin, I think, would be is getting close to being in a position of being run out of town if he gets this far and just lays another complete egg against a team that may be equal or maybe even a little bit better talent wise than what his squad is.
Yeah. Yep. David, I know you have a question that you are wanting to ask. What is yours?
So this is mainly geared toward Ed, but
Thanks.
yeah, but all season Texas has had a top three, top four defense, but it got absolutely shredded by Arizona State. And listen, we don't need to say it enough, or I feel like we haven't said it enough. Cam Skadaboo is a beast, okay, but Arizona State is not Ohio State. Arizona State does not have a $20 million roster. So, Ed, how does Texas's defense fare against Ohio State when it got blasted by ASU?
Okay. Your pejoratives are getting a little bit out of hand. They did not get blasted by ASU.
455 total yards, I think. Is that not getting blasted?
Okay, that's yards. That's not getting blasted by. Otherwise, Texas would not be in the semifinal.
Okay, well, terminology aside, okay, Texas's defense did get shredded by that offense.
I it got it got exposed a little bit by that offense because of how well the coaching for Arizona State put together a game plan that was able to keep their offense on the field for that long. Keep in mind, Arizona State stayed on the field for 38 minutes of that ball game versus 22 for Texas. I don't care what team is on the field. When your defense has to play a nose to nose football game for 38 minutes, they're going to start cracking a little bit further down the field and a little bit later in that game. I The biggest thing is going to be the first half. With Texas's defense, by far one of the best secondaries in the country, has to not clamp down, but at least have maintained somewhat control of one of the best wide receiver rooms in the country. That's going to be the biggest matchup that I want to see happen because if Ohio State's receivers cannot get free, what is Will Howard going to do? What is that running game for Ohio State going to do? Because against Texas's front seven, I don't think the Ohio State offensive line is going to be able to hold up with Anthony Hill Jr., Colin Simmons, uh, Gabena. I don't think Ohio State would be able to do the things that they've been doing if that secondary can keep up with the Ohio State side.
Fair
Yeah,
enough.
yeah, it's going to be tough. I think for any defense, when you have a wide receiver room like that with Ohio State, but Texas has done well throughout the year with their defensive backs. So Will they be able to do that in this game? That is a big question that we will get an answer for when they face off. For me, this question's gonna come with a little bit of controversy, so I'm gonna have to explain a little bit more. But my question here is, will we finally see Quinn Ewers win a big game? And I want to elaborate here because
I love how we're getting 2 Texas questions.
I know it's because for me, all right, of course, against Arizona State in the quarterfinal and the first round against Clemson are big games because it is the college football playoff. But I want to be real for a second. We saw last year against Washington. We saw the SEC championship game. Can Quinn Ewers finally get over this hump himself? See, the tough thing is we just talked about the coaches. Coaches tend to be there longer than the players, unless you're Cam McCormick at Miami, who's on his 11th year of eligibility. Coaches tend to last longer than the players. Quinn Ewers has this lucrative $6 million transfer portal offer on the table right now, but he still needs to win a big game. Uh, will he win this big game against Ohio State? I've already heard David's answer essentially here, but Ed, I know this is kind of going directed towards you. Are we going to see Quinn Ewers win that big game for Texas?
I don't want to go too deep into a preview of the game just yet.
Yeah.
But what I will say is I need to see the coaching staff put Quinn Ewers in the best position to have the impact to bring home a victory in a game of that high of magnitude. From the games uh, against Washington last year, the 2 games against Georgia this year, and even the Arizona State game, I think Sark got outcoached somewhat. So there were some details, some preparation, some things that Sark was not able to uh, big brain himself and his team into being successful throughout the entire game. And I want to see the Texas offensive staff, including Coach Sark, put Quinn in a position where he can win that game, win these big games. See, to have him do it in this game against Ohio State, I would say uh, that is going to be a tough task. But you put Quinn Ewers in a position which it's all or nothing. He's already shown you that he is going to make that throw. He is going to uh, put his team in the best possible position with the information that he's being given by the coaching staff to go ahead and have that big play to win the game. That 4th and 13 that won the game for Texas, and Quinn Ewers, he orchestrated that on the field. What I need to see is the offensive staff put Quinn in a position where he can do that the entire game, not just in small points along the way.
Yeah, we need kind of like that flawless game plan like we saw with Ohio State against Oregon. I mean, it was pretty much flawless, and to think this late in the year to have that in such a high profile game, you didn't really quite expect that, but you need to start seeing those things. Great game plan calling for these semifinal games. David, do you want a quick answer before I ask one more question?
Well, I think you pretty much know my answer. I predicted
Yeah,
Ohio State to win, so
yeah.
I think like I can maybe twist it around a bit and say, do I think that Ewers will put play a good enough game? Well, and I did say that I think Texas is going to get blasted, but Ewers could still have a decent enough game. Like the Texas defense could just completely splatter, and they give up like 60 points. I don't think they're going to give up 60 points, but the defense could have a terrible game, but Ewers could still have a decent game.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, just really quick, hypothetical kind of question. Of these 4 teams that are here, which team is more likely to be here again next year?
I mean, I'll say Ohio State just because Ohio State has those high expectations every single year.
Well, will any of these quarterbacks be returning? Because Will Howard is he a senior? And then you got Riley Leonard. He'll be
He's a
gone.
senior.
He's
Yeah.
a senior. Quinn Ewers sounds like he may be transferring. And then Drew Aller. I
He's
don't
going to
know.
be back.
Okay, so he did announce he'll be back. So, but Ohio State's just got such a talented team, even outside of Will Howard not being there.
I just want to say real quick too, like Ohio State, y'all may win the national championship, all right, but just remember at the end of the day, and hell, I'm not even going to mention the Michigan loss, as embarrassing that was. No, no, no. At the end of the day, just remember your mascot is a nut, a damn nut. Right?
Ohio State will always be hated. Sorry, it's just kind of a pastime.
So, if I may answer your question there, Matthew,
Yeah.
I'll answer in song. Dun, 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 dun. Texas Fight. We're the only team that's back from the semifinals last year, so there's no reason why this program cannot continue to roll along and have more success going forward. We are going to have Arch Manning as our quarterback next year, who has been on the bench and developing for 2 years. He finally gets his shot next year, and I don't think it's going to be much of a drop off from Quinn Ewers this year.
It's like Aaron Rodgers, just sitting on the bench looking at Brett Favre.
And then
Or
Aaron
Glenn
Rodgers
Lowell,
love,
sitting on the bench looking at Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah.
Or Patrick Mahomes sitting on the bench looking at Alex Smith.
Yep. What were you saying, David?
Well, I said, just like from Favre to Rodgers, and then from Rodgers to Love.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, we will find out next year when we do our show a year from now on which team is still here. But that's about all we have today, folks. Appreciate you guys tuning in. I'm very interested what you guys have to say because there's a lot of questions that we want to see answered. So let us know what questions you want answered too in these semifinal matchups because it's going to be a doozy. It really is. So if you could hit that like and subscribe button, share these videos, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. But until next time, guys, we are rounding third, and we are headed for home.